Good morning. This is Dr. Clay Owens, your CSU CITTC professor. This is our live online session 3 lecture. Because of file size and transfer problems, I'm going to a static photo rather than live action of me in the scene. I believe this will work out satisfactorily. It's what we went to on the old Adobe Connect system several years ago. Today is Memorial Day in the United States. It is a holiday. It's very hot here. It's around 100, 102 degrees Fahrenheit, which in your system, that would be 39 degrees Celsius, I believe. Let's get started. What is morality? Morality, in a broad sense, is a set of rules that shapes our behavior in various social situations. It is more sensitive, doing the good instead of the bad. Therefore, it establishes a level of standard for virtuous conduct. Your morality is your sense of what is right and wrong. It comes from a lot of your background, from your family, from the situation, from your history. If you were treated poorly by someone, it may cause you to never treat someone in that situation poorly. My father used to talk about when he was young, would do yard work for people, and it would be 10 cents an hour. So he talked about this one lady who was very wealthy, had a large home with lots of property, and he worked for 3 hours for her. And before they started, she had agreed at 10 cents per hour. Then when it was all over with, she gave him 25 cents and said, well, it's 3 for a quarter, 3 for 25 instead of 3 for 30. And so my father was like 9 or 10 years old, but he had to argue with this lady, an authority figure, that he was supposed to get what he was supposed to get. He was supposed to get 30 cents, 10 cents for each of the 3 hours, not 25 cents, which was less. He finally got her to pay it, but he never worked for those people again. He learned then, and this may or may not have been a good thing, but he learned then not to trust wealthy people at all. So your morality, what you grow up with, your sense of what's going on, really does affect you. This is the corporate governance code of the Coca-Cola company. Some of you did some of your essays on Coca-Cola, selling sugary products and promoting obesity and being unhealthy. Pretty interesting stuff. Coca-Cola makes it clear that the company is inclined towards a good business morality. Its corporate governance code starts with these announcements. At the Coca-Cola Company, we aim to lead by example and to learn from experience. We set high standards for our people at all levels and strive to consistently meet them. We are guided by our established standards of corporate governance and ethics. We review our systems to ensure that we achieve international best practices in terms of transparency and accountability. So those are big buzzwords these days that you have to be very aware of. Transparency, accountability, sustainability, all this kind of stuff. They're just buzzwords. There'll be some different words in a few years. The foundation of our approach to corporate governance is laid out in our corporate governance guidelines and in the charters of our board of directors committees. So each group of committees has their own set of guidelines and rules. So let's talk some more about where does morality come from. The principles of moral ethics can be injected into any business. Ethical businesses recognize the power of conducting business in socially responsible ways, and they realize that doing so leads to an increase in profits, increased customer satisfaction, and decreased employee turnover. So ethical, fair business is the best idea for people who plan to stay in business a long time. In the long haul, over many, many years, ethics pays off. And you see here they talk about how it pays off in increased profits, increased customer satisfaction, and decreased employee turnover. Those are all things that, if they're not right, can put you out of business. Business ethics is concerned with applying a moral framework to the way organizations do business. From dealing with human resources issues to sales and marketing policies, ethical viewpoints can shape and change the way businesses operate. Business ethics has both normative and descriptive elements. The normative part of business ethics has to do with understanding how the behavior you and your employees exhibit in relation to cultural issues or social upbringing, how you grew up, what your family thinks, what your philosophy is, what your religion is. I've recently come to realize that Buddhism in and of itself is not really a religion. It is more of a philosophy, a way of thinking, a way of doing things. That you could be another religion, a Christian or a Jew or some other religion, and be a Buddhist, a practicing Buddhist. There are not any conflicts between the two. It's very interesting. The key to normative ethics for business owners is to understand how personal beliefs affect the choices that you make as a business owner. The descriptive part of business ethics, on the other hand, is related to how you incorporate best practices into your organization's policies and procedures. Henry Ford. It's interesting that we quote Henry Ford because Henry Ford was a bad man. He supported the Nazis in Germany. He treated his employees very poorly. He refused to assist the United States during World War II. The President of the United States had to threaten to nationalize his business before he would change over and start making defense products for them. He owned newspapers in the Midwest part of the United States that were very anti-Semitic, blamed everything bad on the Jewish people. Just a bad person. And not that great of a businessman in spite of his success. He went broke 3 or 4 times before he was successful. People that were good people that worked for him got mad and left because of the way he treated them. The Dodge brothers were his engineers that worked for him. They got tired of him. They moved over and started their own company, Dodge. Harvey Owens worked for Henry Ford. Harvey Owens is actually the one that promoted and put in the production lines. Henry decided he didn't like Harvey, so he fired Harvey. Harvey went over and started the Oldsmobile Motors Corporation, which was very successful and lasted till just a few years ago. Henry Ford just chewed people up and spit them out. He wasn't that good a guy, but he has some pretty famous quotes that people like to talk about. Here's one. There is one rule for the industrialists, and that is make the best quality goods possible at the lowest cost possible, paying the highest wages possible. And that sounds good, but his possible and other people's possible were different numbers. The meaning of moral justification. Justification in terms of business ethics can be portrayed in 2 different ways. In business ethics, do the means justify the ends, or do the ends justify the means? Do the means justify the ends? That means you might do something wrong or unfair, but it causes something good to happen later. It's interesting. Is it better to have a set of rules telling you what you ought to do, or should you worry more about how things are going to end up and do anything you can to reach that final goal? It's a very, very mixed bag of what to do. Personally, I think that in general, you just need to follow a set of rules, a set of guidelines, a set of standards in every decision, and the end will justify what you did. John ran a medicine business in California in the United States. He had a herbal product that was used to stop nausea and vomiting for chemotherapy patients, cancer patients who had very serious problems. California laws had allowed his business okay, but federal agencies, which have to approve things that go from one state to another, had not approved it. Therefore, selling it on the national level was breaking the law. On the other hand, if he didn't sell it on a national level, people would suffer. So he had to make a decision on what to do. Was it better to break the law and sell the product to people to help them, or was it better to just sell the product in his area? So he had to make the decision. If he follows the rules, no matter what the consequences are, then when the agents ask him whether he's selling the medicine, and the ethical action will be to say yes. But if the ends justify the means, then he would lie and say, no, I'm not selling it to anybody else. That way these other people could get what they needed to help make them get better. So it's kind of a mixed thing. Which way do you go? We used to call it situational ethics, but where it might be wrong to lie, sometimes you might tell a lie for a good reason. The importance of relationships. Business morality largely depends on business relationships. Our rights and obligations spring largely from relationships. These include our relationships with shareholders, customers, and general stakeholders from our business. They can also offer moral reasons for particular actions. Relationships with your shareholders means you have a moral duty to them, such as to offer profits to shareholders and to be transparent. Sometimes companies will spend too much money on making things nice for the employees, the upper level employees, but end up shorting the value of the stock and the dividends on the stock. Moral questions are not always distinct questions. It's not always a simple yes or no. Sometimes it's, well, maybe we'll do it this way one time, maybe we'll do it another way another time. Moral problems are not a separate, special, or particular domain to what is followed only on special occasions. Moral issues are present all of the time. Most decisions that people make usually have a degree of moral importance. The challenge is in recognizing that as a fact. Morality is often finding the best choice overall, taking in consideration the results, the economics involved, and the technical and financial appropriateness, then balancing that against other sorts of business values which the organization follows. Many years ago, I ran a fast food place. It was fried chicken, not KFC, but a competitor. One of the things we found was that the neighborhood I was in had some very, very poor people in it. There's this one lady who would come by, and once a week she could come by and buy a small item just as a treat. And what we would do is we would give her a large drink. She'd only pay for a small drink. We'd give her a refill on the drink when she left. She would go somewhere and come back, buy and stop to rest at my restaurant before she went home. And it wasn't what she paid to do. She had left, but we would give her a free refill on her drink if she had the same cup. And sometimes we'd give her a new cup and 2 or 3 refills that are taken home. But it was just a balancing act. Sometimes she would have a gift, a check from some family member that she couldn't get the bank to cash because she didn't have any money in the bank. So I would cash them at the store for her because I felt that was the right thing to do. Being in the neighborhood, she spent what she could, but she was very poor. But we tried to help her out. So you have to balance all of these things against your own values. There's no crafted out formula, algorithm, or special magic for making moral decisions. There's no model or computer program to say exactly what is ethical. Good moral decision making includes knowledge of the facts, careful consideration of the moral values and principles that are relevant to the situation. Importantly, sensitivity and awareness of the range of interest are also highly sought in the moral decision-making process. Your morals, your values, what you think is right and wrong enters into everything you do. Let's get the facts straight. To make a good decision, we have to get the facts of the situation straight. In some very difficult cases, additional facts may make the correct course of action apparent. Sometimes these facts are available through science, statistics, or from the experiences of people who have studied the situation for a long time. Often you need to get hold of people who worked in the company before you. When I first moved to Charleston, I worked at a manufacturing company, and we were moving machinery from one city back to this city. We didn't have anybody that knew how to operate the machinery. So what I did was I chased down and found old people who had retired, who used to work in the factory and knew about that machine and how it operated. So I was able to get these people to come back and work part-time. They had the experience, they had the additional information that could make everything work. Sensitivity to the moral issues involved in everyday activities is important for moral decision making. Sometimes we may take the help of instincts for making trivial decisions. One example might be that most of us do not require an impetus to avoid lying in most cases. Most people are wired to tell the truth. I've learned over the years in supervising children and supervising adults is that if you get someone in the office and you ask them a question, they'll tell you something. And then if you just look at them, don't say anything, just look at them. In a few minutes, they'll tell you something else about it. And then they'll tell you something else about it. And then pretty soon, they'll tell you something very different, but totally the truth. Most people are wired to tell the truth and own up to what they did and what they know about. It's just human nature. The role of discussion in morality. If morality in business ethics is primarily about shared values, then business discussion, which can take many modes of communications with different parties, takes a central place in moral business decision making. In many cases, more than one party may often be involved, and we should include others in the process. People should have input. People should buy into it. It's generally good to let a large group of people agree on what is the correct way to go if the whole organization is going to be following it. Discussions as a means of consensus building. Discussion is important in moral decision making, as it is often important that others around us agree with our decisions or at least understand them. For example, the consumer products industry often collects feedback through surveys and marketing gigs to take the business discussion forward. This is often done with new products. I knew a guy when I lived in Columbia, South Carolina, USA, named Chuck Wentworth, who had a consulting firm. His primary thing was taking new products, new flavors of different products, of foods and other things, having a group of people come in, sit down at a table, and talk about what was going on. They would call it a focus group, where they would talk about the product. They would say if they liked it, did it need to be a different color, did it need to be a different flavor, anything it needed differently. Very good business. Companies paid him good money for this information. Discussion as a way of learning from others. We can learn from discussing moral questions with others. Others can provide valuable insight and experiences. Software makers can have valuable feedback from users. That is why you often see beta versions, beta tests of new products before they are widely dispersed. Sometimes you'll see a new Microsoft product out in a beta version free for a little while, and then it expires. They want your feedback. They want to know what's good or bad about it before they put it out to a lot of people. Gamers see a lot of this too. Guide to this moral decision making. There is no formula for making good medical diagnoses or for giving good legal advice. All of these involve huge elements of experience and sensitivity to the situation. Experience and sensitivity will not guarantee that a good decision is made, but it may help assure that the decisions are not hasty and that they have good consideration of all the possibilities. Just because you do something slowly doesn't mean you're going to do it better or do it more correctly. It just means you did it more slowly. It's a cartoon talking about what's the use of having conflicts of interest if you're not going to use them. There's a website called Ethisphere that links the idea of ethics to increased profits. Ethisphere is a publication that illuminates the relationship between ethics and higher profits, which we talked about earlier. You can look it up. There's the web address, ethisphere.com. There's several parts of it that are free. Some parts are paid membership, but the free parts are very interesting to look at and read about. Business ethics and social responsibility. There's an article and a story here about an executive who made a lot of money off the Enron scandal, faking the profits numbers. He's going to have to pay the U.S. government, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, a fine of $31 million. Not exactly in keeping with the amount of money he made, but it is a fine, it is a penalty. And believe me, I probably won't make $31 million in my whole life put together. Principles and standards determine acceptable conduct in business. Business ethics and social responsibility. There are different issues that have been important in different time periods. If you look on this chart, you will see that it talks about the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, and the early 2000s. There are different levels, different things that are discussed. The 1960s, there was environmental issues, which actually, most of the issues for each of these time periods still move over, and it actually just adds together and makes a much longer list. Environmental issues, civil rights issues, increased employee-employer tension, workplace civility, honesty, a changing work ethic, rising drug use. 1970s, it was employee militancy, people rioting and fighting against their employers, human rights issues, covering up issues rather than correcting them, and different types of harassment based on sex, race, and other situations. In the 1980s, they talked about bribes, illegal contracting practices, influence peddling, bribery, deceptive advertising, financial fraud, savings and loan scandals, and transparency issues, seeing what's going on. The 1990s, sweatshops and unsafe working conditions in third world countries, issues like the Nike case that you looked at, rising corporate liability for personal damages, cigarette and tobacco companies being sued by people who got hurt by their products. Again, harmful products being marketed to people. Ethical issues involved with that. Financial mismanagement and fraud. Enron scandals, savings and loan scandals, a lot of these other things. Then in the 2000s and today, employee benefits, privacy issues, financial mismanagement, intellectual property theft. That's a real big one, is everything is computer-based now. So your programs and games and things that are on the computer are termed as intellectual property. Responsible consumption. That means using things that can be regrown and reestablished. The role of business in promoting sustainable development. Business ethics and social responsibility. A business has an obligation to maximize its positive impact and minimize its negative impact on society. It should have safe products, safe places for people to work, decent profit and return to the stockholders. They need to be working, that they are not causing pollution and other problems. Concern about unethical business practices continue. There's a big company in the United States that runs hospitals, nursing homes, and doctors groups, Health South, and they have had a lot of problems with inaccurate and deceptive accounting practices. Some of the unethical roles in business that are also illegal in the United States are accounting fraud, deceptive advertising, unfair competitive practices, and internet theft. Internet theft is a big one. Often people that are involved in losing on internet theft are victims of their own greed. Ethical conduct that is good ethics builds trust, promotes confidence, and validates relationships between companies, people, employees, and customers. And by doing that, you learn to recognize and resolve ethical issues. An ethical issue is an identifiable problem, situation, or opportunity that requires a person to choose from amongst several actions that may be valued as right or wrong, ethical or unethical. I used to have an employee that his catchphrase every time you'd ask him to do something or tell him to go do something, he'd act like he wasn't supposed to do it, that it wasn't his job and this, that, and the other. And he always say, "You ain't right," meaning that you're not correct. You shouldn't be asking me to do this. But I was always correct. It was always his job, and it was always kind of a joke. Recognizing ethical issues in business. These was a survey done in private sector business several years ago, asking people to tell about things that they had seen or were aware of in their workplace that were being done that they thought was unethical. Many business issues may seem straightforward and easy to resolve, but in reality they become very complex. One of the first types of unethical conduct observed is putting your own interests ahead of the organization, 22%. Abusive behavior, generally of other employees, 21%. Lying to the employees, which a lot of bosses do, 20%. Misreporting their hours worked, 17%. Internet abuse, 16%, people doing personal business on the internet. Safety violations, 15%. Lying to stakeholders, shareholders, other people, 14%. Discrimination against other people, customers or employees, 13%. And stealing from the company, 11%. Many people are guilty of stealing from the company, even if they just take an ink pen that the company bought and carry it home to use, carry paper home to use in their printer. If they stay after work and print a school paper out on company machines. Sometimes if your company is helping pay for your education, they will give you permission to stay additional time and use company facilities, but that's not always the case. Types of unethical behavior and what causes it. Overly aggressive financial objectives, unreasonable goals for people to try and meet, abusive and intimidating behavior, generally from bosses to subordinates, conflicts of interest, where a person has some family member or relative at some other part of the business that you're doing trade with, fairness and honesty, communications, and generally business relationships. Abusive and intimidating behavior. What's become real common to talk about in the United States is what you call bullies, people that push each other, people around, whether they have the right to do so or not. Often people like to feel like they're more important than they are. Some examples of abusive and intimidating behavior include spreading rumors to damage others, blocking others' communications in the workplace, flaunting status or authority to take advantage of others, discrediting others' ideas and opinions, use of emails to write about and demean others, failing to communicate or return communications, insults, yelling, and shouting, using terminology to discriminate by gender, race, or age, using eye or body contact to hurt others or their reputation, taking credit for others' work or ideas. Like you can say, yes, that's a good idea, or you can say, yeah, that's a good idea. So the first one means it is a good idea and it's real. The second one is you're being sarcastic and saying, yeah, that's a good idea. That's because it's not. So it's how you say things, how you do things. I apologize for these little seesaws. I thought I locked them so they wouldn't rattle like that. Anyway, conflict of interest. The most common ethical issue identified by employees is where employees advance their personal interests over the interests of others in the company and they try to benefit themselves at the expense of the company. Unethical behavior. This is an older copy of the list, but there is a new list that comes out every year. Transparency International. You can look them up on a website. It's www.transparency.org. It's down in the bottom in the footnote. Talks about countries that are considered on a world basis to be the least corrupt countries. I always note that the United States is not in the top 19. The United States falls way down to 20. Finland, Denmark, and New Zealand at the top of good. Singapore, Sweden at the top. Iceland, Netherlands, Switzerland, Canada. Canada, so close to the U.S., so much like the U.S., but ranks very much better than the U.S. Australia, Luxembourg in the U.K., Hong Kong, and that's a little conflict. I hadn't heard that much good stuff about Hong Kong. Austria, Germany, Ireland, and Japan are tied in the score. France and the United States at number 20. Fairness and honesty, the heart of business ethics. Part of it relates to how employees use their resources, how they make sure that they do no harm to customers, how they try to provide accurate representations of products and situations to persons inside and outside of the organization, and disclosure, how they talk about and tell if there are any conflicts that might come up with anything related to them and how they operate, who they know, who they're related to, and other companies that you do business with. This is a list about employees taking supplies. We talked about the pens earlier. These are, if you see, pens and pencils are the highest that people know about. Yellow Post-it notes, small notepads, printer paper, envelopes, mouse pads. Now we're getting serious now. Computers, which are very expensive, phones, office furniture, plants, and paintings. So it seems like the more expensive items are talked about less often and being stolen. I think that most companies do inventory tags and track the more expensive items. Most companies really don't keep up with their pens, pencils, and notepads very carefully. They just build in that they know they're going to need a lot of them each year. They did a poll asking some high school students in the United States what they thought about honesty, what different terms they had been involved in, what things they had done. 62% said that they had cheated on exams at least once. 35% said that they had copied papers from the internet, and that means inappropriately used them. 27% said they shoplifted. That's where you're in a retail store and instead of picking up something and paying for it, you put it in your pocket and walk out with it and do not pay for it. That's called shoplifting. And 23% cheated to win at sports, cheated to win at a game. Those are some numbers that speak very poorly of the United States in my mind, considering the United States was originally settled by people who were religious zealots, the Puritans and others who were very strict, and now the country has fallen to these kinds of levels. It's very interesting. Ethical concerns regarding communications, false, misleading advertising, We're going to talk about that in our next YouTube session. Deceptive personal selling tactics, product safety and quality, unsubstantiated claims, and product labeling. At one point when I was traveling, my planes got off schedule and I ended up staying in Japan overnight unexpectedly. The airline got a bus and moved us all over to a nice hotel. What I noticed when I was watching television, and it was all in Japanese, I could not understand any of it. Almost every channel had advertisements on it for different health products. And these were health products that I'm very sure did not work very well. Sometimes these kind of products make it to the United States and the government makes the companies quit advertising them because they advertise all of these outrageous things that are not true. Big parts of the United States government are really and truly socialist. No other word for it. And what they do is try to protect the U.S. citizens from their own ignorance buying these products that will not work. Ethical concerns regarding business relationships, relationships with customers, relationships with suppliers, and relationships with co-workers. You see in the photo is a picture of two people shaking hands, one with a black skin, one with white skin. This is always an issue in the United States with all the different nationalities and skin races, colors, and creeds and religions coming together into one country. People need to deal with each other fairly. The days of bigotry and treating people unfairly because of their skin color are just going to have to stop. People are going to have to be treated and judged on how they perform, not what they look like. Plagiarism, that's one for students to think about. That's the reason we have the Safe Assign system and some others in place to double check what people are doing. As you know, I have to carefully look at the Safe Assign reports. Sometimes the Safe Assign is just a computer program. And if you do your bibliography reference items exactly correctly, if you do your in-text citations exactly correctly, if you repeat the 5 questions and headings that go with an essay correctly, exactly as they were presented, they may come up as being copied from somewhere else. So I have to look at it very carefully and be sure what's going on. The same with any kind of papers that you're presenting and turning in, with the PowerPoints and all these things. The best thing is to paraphrase, change it to your own words, and do an in-text citation for where it came from. Questions to consider in determining whether an action is ethical or unethical. Are there any potential legal restrictions or violations that could result from this action? Does my company have a specific code of ethics or policy on this action that is in question? Is this activity customary in your industry? Are there any industry trade groups that provide guidelines or codes of conduct to address this issue? Would this activity be accepted by your co-workers? One of the things we always say in the United States is, would you want your children to know what you did? Would you want your children to learn that this is how you do things? This is how you operate at work. Do you want them to operate this way? Do you want them to grow up to be just like you, good and bad? Will your decision or action withstand open discussion with co-workers and managers, and will it survive untarnished? How does this activity fit with your own beliefs and values? So this is all very important. Open discussion of ethical issues does not eliminate ethical problems, but it does promote trust and learning in an organization. You talk about it, you trust other people with situations, and you try to see what they think. Improving ethical behavior in a business. Ethical decisions in an organization are influenced by three key factors. One, individual standards and values. Two, the manager's and co-workers' influence when you talk about it. And three, then you have an opportunity to make codes and rules to follow. Then you become able to make an ethical choice in your business. Improving ethical behavior, codes of ethics. Formalized rules and standards that describe what a company expects of its employees. You can see this rule book with the check mark about what's approved in the big office building behind it. So we would like to have an easy looking list, but most codes of ethics are principles, not specifics. Key things to consider in developing a code of ethics. Create a team to assist with the process of developing the code. Include management and non-management employees from across different departments and functions. Solicit input from employees from different departments, functions, and regions to compile a list of common questions and answers to include in the code documents. Make certain that the headings of the code sections can be easily understood by all employees. Avoid referencing specific laws and regulations of the U.S. or other countries, particularly for codes that may go to other countries besides yours. Speak in terms of principles and ideas, not just laws. Hold employee group meetings on a complete version of the text using language and wording that everyone can understand and good examples. Inform employees that they will receive a copy of the code after this. Let all the employees that they will know that they will receive future ethics training. There's a website called the National Business Ethics Survey. According to them, employees in organizations that have written codes of ethics and standards of conduct are more likely to report misconduct when they see it. So if you have a written set of rules, people become more aware of what's going on. Whistleblowing. That's when an employee exposes an employer's wrongdoing to outsiders, such as the media or to government regulatory agencies. The United States has laws that protect whistleblowers if they're telling the truth. Here are 3 people that made the cover of Time magazine one year. One is from Enron, one is from the FBI, and one is from WorldCom. All 3 groups that had problems, unethical behavior. These people talked about it, made it public, and some people were fined and jailed over the mistakes. Social responsibility has 4 dimensions: economic, legal, ethical, and voluntary. Voluntary includes philanthropic, which means charity. Philanthropic is charity. There's a pyramid of social responsibility. I think you've seen things in management courses like Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a pyramid. And then there's the learning pyramid, different things. Voluntary responsibilities ethical responsibilities, legal responsibilities, and economic responsibilities. So if you look at the base of it, a company needs to be profitable. That's the very first thing they need to do. The second thing they need to do is obey the law. Once they are doing that, then they move up to higher levels of being ethical and being a good citizen. But at the bottom line, you have to be profitable, have a good, solid base to get started. There's no good being ethical if your whole company goes out of business. You're not helping anybody then. Corporate citizenship, the extent to which businesses meet the legal, ethical, economic, and voluntary charitable responsibilities placed on them by the stakeholders. Remember, stakeholders include stockholders, employees, and members of the community. Some companies that are named as best corporate citizens include, in the US, Intel in your computer, Eaton, which includes paper companies and other things, Nike, who had a bad stretch there but have apparently come out on top now, and Deere and Company, which is a outdoor machinery company, lots of agricultural machinery and other things. There is a nature of social responsibility, reasons for social responsibility. Business helped to create many of the social problems that exist today, so it should play a role in solving them, especially in the areas of pollution and cleanup. Businesses should be more responsible because they have the financial and technical resources to help solve social problems. As members of society, businesses should do their fair share to help others. Socially responsible decision-making by businesses can prevent increased government regulation. If businesses manage themselves, sometimes the government will stay out of it. Social responsibility is necessary to ensure economic survival. If businesses want educated and healthy employees, customers with money to spend, and suppliers with quality goods and services over the next years, they must take steps to help solve the social and environmental problems that exist today. They've got to help with it. Arguments against it. It sidetracks managers from the primary goal of business, earning a profit. If they're donating money to social causes and doing other things, it cuts into their profits. Businesses only exist to make a profit, not to promote social change. Again, another argument against social responsibility. Participation in social programs gives businesses too much power, maybe at the expense of other segments of the community, such as religions and public charities that should be helping. Some people question whether business has the expertise they need to make good decisions about these things. Will their decisions be tainted toward profit rather than social good? Many people believe that social problems are the responsibility of the government, and then the voters hold them accountable. Owners and stockholders, primarily concerned with profit or return on investment. There is the financial community at large that are interested in money, proper accounting procedures, and protecting the business owner's rights and investments. Very important responsibilities of management. In dealing with employees, there's a responsibility to provide a safe workplace, adequate compensation and pay, listen to complaints and grievances, and treat the people fairly. These things are often backed up by law in the United States to protect the workers. Environmental issues. animal rights, concerns about pollution, and wanting to go green using products that are sustainable, recyclable, replaceable. Community relations, general community and global warfare, hardcore unemployed, charitable contributions, and Avon's breast cancer awareness crusade. Some kind of do good things that companies work with for the public good. One of the things we look at here is the hardcore unemployed. Generally speaking, the United States right now, the United States has excess jobs available. There are jobs that people could get if there were people available. Often they're not the best paying jobs is the problem. That's where automation will come in again, I think. That concludes the presentation. This one is a little bit longer. I hope you're able to listen and enjoy it. There will be one more presentation. I'll get it out in a few days. It will be session 4. This concludes session 3. Thank you.